channel, and this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about another massive missile and drone strike that was carried out by Moscow during the previous night. During this period of time, we got lots of videos from different parts of Ukraine. For example, this video was published from the city of Kiev this morning, right after the Russians finished their massive missile strike and drone strike. This video was recorded basically several minutes ago. Here we can see a smoke screen somewhere in the central part of the city of Kiev. Most likely something important was damaged and destroyed by the Russians, as usually the Russians will report that they destroyed another military facility that Ukrainians used to produce drones or some parts for missiles. The city of Kiev wasn't the only city that was attacked by Russians. According to information we have, the heaviest attack, the heaviest strikes were carried out by the Russians in the southeastern part of Ukraine in the cities of Zaporozhye, Dnipro and Pavlograd. These are the videos that we got from the city of Dnipro. So this is the moment of strike when the building was almost damaged and destroyed. Here we can see another video published this morning on the 30th of August of 2025. A smoke screen in the central part of the city. Some building was damaged and destroyed. Few more videos we got from the city of Zaporozhye. For example, in this video we can see how civilians were making video from building that was just hit by Russians. Lots of ruins, as you can see, and later we got additional details. And indeed, according to pro-Ukrainian resources, as a result of massive missile and drone strike, a civilian building, a residential area was hit, and 5 storage building was damaged or probably even destroyed. So once again, we are making this video in the morning of the 30th of August of 2025 when just first data occurred. So most likely during the upcoming hours we're going to receive additional details, additional updates, which buildings were damaged, which facilities were damaged, and so on. But anyway, by the morning of the 30th of August we got the map of approximate roads of Russian attack, and as you can see, according to this map, the Russians used drones, cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. The northern and the western part of Ukraine mainly were attacked by cruise missiles and by drones. The cities of Lutsk, Dubna, Rovno and Kiev. When talking about the southeastern part, the Russians used drones, cruise missiles and ballistic missiles. As for this part of Ukraine, the Russians attacked the city of Zaporozhye, Dnipro, Pavlograd and Slaviansk-Kramatorsk agglomeration. So once again, lots of explosions were recorded, lots of drones were recorded. The Ukrainian resources reported that the Russians used around 600 air vehicles. We're talking about drones and missiles altogether, and the Ukrainians are saying that they managed to destroy almost everything. But once again, when talking about scenes from the ground, when talking about real videos, we see that most likely Ukrainians gave us a bit incorrect numbers regarding effectiveness of work of their air defense. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to be next, because we believe that during the next hours we're going to receive additional updates, what exactly the Russians were attacking. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. During the previous 12 hours we got additional changes, and first let's talk about the Zaporozhye direction. During the previous 12 hours, during the previous days, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the area of the village by the name of Plavny. So let's compare the map between the dates. This is the situation by the end of the 29th of August of 2025, and this is the situation by the beginning of the 30th of August of 2025. According to neutral mappers, the Russians are about to finish the battle for the settlement of Plavny. There are just 10 buildings left for the armored force of the Russian Federation in the most northern part of the settlement. So we're talking about this small pocket. It seems that in coming days or even hours the Russians will finish the battle for this territory. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the area of Orekhov. We haven't received anything for a very long period of time from this direction, but yesterday pro-Ukrainian resources reported that the armored forces of the Russian Federation carry out another massive offensive operation using vehicles and tanks in the direction of the settlement of Mala Takmachka. For example, in this video we can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 vehicles that were moving towards the settlement of Mala Takmachka, including a tank with with anti-mine equipment. But the Ukrainians managed to discover the movements of the Russian forces, and they began bombing and attacking the approximate route of Russian attack. According to Ukrainian sources, the Russians suffered losses and were forced to fall back. Basically, the Russians haven't managed to get even the outskirts of the settlement of Mala Takhmachka. So very interesting. As for the eastern Zaporozhye direction, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians managed to improve their positions. Let's compare the map between the dates. According to neutral mappers and according to pro-Ukrainian resources, the armed force of the Russian Federation answered the village of Kamyshyvaha. So, for example, by the end of the 29th of August, the pro-Ukrainian resources that reported that the Russians improved their positions to the northeast of Kamyshyvaha, but by the morning of the 30th of August of 2025, the same resources reported that the Russians answered the most northwestern part of the settlement, which means that Ukrainians who are currently located in the southern, southeastern, and the eastern parts of the settlement of Kamyshyvaha lost any possibilities for evacuation because the Russians, by their attack, managed to cut Ukrainians for supplying support and from retreating. So the situation is a real disaster for the armed forces of Ukraine, and we believe that during the upcoming 24-48 hours, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will report complete control over the territory, and we will color everything like this. After the fall of the settlement of Kamyshyvaha, the Russians will have possibilities to move further, will get possibilities to move further in the western direction, and the battles for the settlements of Ternovo, Berezovo, Stepova will start. At the same time, pro-Ukrainian resources reported that they managed to restore complete control over the settlement of Novoselovka. I would like to remind you that yesterday pro-Ukrainian resources reported that a group of Russian forces managed to enter the settlement and to establish a very strong foothold in the central part. And yesterday, this report published by pro-Ukrainian resources most likely surprised every single one of us. But today, they adjusted the map back, showing that most likely Ukrainians managed to regroup themselves and to counterattack. And as a result of this possible counteroffensive operation, the Russians were forced to fall back. So based on this report, we restored control over the settlement by the armed forces of Ukraine. So when summarizing everything from the Zaporozhye direction, we see that during the previous days, the Russians continue offensive their operation in the western part of this direction. Furthermore, the Russians continue their offensive operation on the eastern flank, and during the previous 24 hours, we got reports that the Russians resumed their attacks in the direction of Mala Takhmachka and Orekhov. So we see that the Russians are trying to attack the Zaporozhye direction at least from three areas: from the west, from the south, and from the east, which means that most likely the Zaporozhye direction is going to be the most important direction for the armed force of the Russian Federation during the autumn and probably early winter military campaigns. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the vicinity and around the Pokrovsk agglomeration. The pro-Ukrainian resources reported that during the previous days, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the most southeastern flank of this front line. The Russians took under control several trenches and positions around the dense network of the fortifications in the vicinity of Grodovka, so nothing special. And when talking about the entire Pokrovsk agglomeration, we haven't been receiving anything special probably for the previous 10 days. So it seems that either there are very heavy clashes along the line of combat contact, and neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians are able to take initiatives in their hand, because both the Russians and the Ukrainians have strong armies and strong positions there, or both the Russians and the Ukrainians are regrouping before launching another offensive operation for Ukrainians to counterattack and to restore control, for the Russians to improve their positions further. So we believe that sooner or later we're going to start receiving additional updates from this area, but as for now we see that nothing changes. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation around the settlement of Konstantinovka. Here we can see the same story. The armed forces of the Russian Federation during the previous days made lots of attempts to improve their positions along the perimeter of the agglomeration, but without any changes on the ground. It seems that both the Russians and the Ukrainians have strong positions in this area, and neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians are able to improve their positions right now. So anyway, a turning point in the battle for Konstantinovka is going to come. The question is whether this turning point is going to come today, tomorrow, or in a month, or in 2 months, or probably in the next year. Now we're moving to the Liman or the Kupiansk direction, and during the previous days, probably the Kupiansk direction was the most active, both from the Russian, from the Ukrainian side. The very heavy clashes continue in the area of the cities of Shandrigalovo, Liman, where the Ukrainians, using the 3rd Storm Brigade, are trying to counterattack Russian positions with the purpose to restore control over them. As for the Liman direction itself, according to information we have, Ukrainians managed to counterattack to the south of Sandrigalova and to force the Russians to fall back a bit, but Ukrainians were completely defeated in this point. As for now, we adjusted the map like this, but most likely we will restore control over this territory with armored force of the Russian Federation. Furthermore, according to information we have, the Russians continue offensive operation between the settlements of Dirilova and the settlement of Shandrigalova. The Russians are trying to get as close as possible to Novoselka and to cut physically or with fire control over the road of Guchenka. If Russians are able to cut this territory, then Ukrainians in Shandrigalova would be caught in cauldron without any chances for evacuation. It seems that this is exactly what the Russians are trying to do right now. From the northern direction, the Russians managed to restore control over the village of Novomikhailovka and over strongholds and positions around the settlement. Another important update is that the Russians, according to several pro-Russian resources, took under control the village of Andreevka. Furthermore, the Russians are saying that Andreevka was taken by the Russians without any resistance from the Ukrainian side. I would like to remind you that the same sources yesterday reported that the Russians secured the village of Glishenkova and began offensive in the direction of Andreevka and Malievka. And today the same sources reported that the Russians took this village under complete control. So, summarizing everything, we can see another breakthrough in the north central Kupiansk or Barova direction. This time the Russians control everything inside of this and along this red line, which means that Ukrainians who are currently located in the village of Novy Mir, in the village of Algievka, and in the area of this dense network of the fortifications were caught by the Russians in cauldron. We expect that the Russians will secure and clear this territory in coming days or maybe even hours. Now let's talk about the northern Kupiansk direction. Additional changes on the ground were recorded as well, but this time the changes were recorded in Ukrainian favor. The pro-Ukrainian mappers reported that Ukrainians managed to carry out a very powerful counter-offensive operation, and as a result of this counter-attack, the Ukrainians restored control over the settlement of Moskovika or over the village of Mirova. So these two titles that both the Russians are using for them. So this is very important counter-offensive because, as we discussed in the previous video, the Ukrainians in the territory of the city of Kupiansk were caught by the Russians in cauldron. The Russians established complete control with the main supply and evacuation roads without any chances for Ukrainians for safe evacuation. So that is why the Ukrainians came to the conclusion that it's time to counterattack the western and northwestern flanks of the city of Kupiansk with the purpose to restore communication with the city itself, and most likely this counteroffensive was pretty successful from the Ukrainian side. We are waiting for additional updates, and we believe that Ukrainians will continue counterattacks with the purpose to restore complete communication with the city of Kupiansk. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes on my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.